A black woman stands defiant as guards block her from a glittering art gala. Her paintings inside, stolen. Will she reclaim her legacy? Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch our latest stories. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the glittering crowd, her breath catching in the crisp Chicago evening air, as the towering glass doors of the Sterling Gallery loomed before her, reflecting the city's skyline in sharp, merciless angles. At 54, her face carried the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered storms, her dark skin glowing under the soft streetlights, her eyes sharp with a fire that refused to dim. She adjusted her simple wool coat, its deep green hue a stark contrast to the sea of sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos swirling around her. The invitation clutched in her gloved hand was worn at the edges, its embossed gold lettering promising entry to the most exclusive art exhibition in decades. Yet, as she stepped forward, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressed against her, and a burly security guard in a black suit planted himself in her path, his hand raised like a barricade. "Ma'am, this is a private event," he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the crowd. "Invitation only. Move along." Evelyn's heart thudded, not from fear but from the familiar sting of dismissal, a wound that had scarred over but never fully healed. She held up the invitation, her fingers steady, her voice calm but firm. "I have an invitation. My name is Evelyn Carter." The guard barely glanced at it, his lips curling into a sneer. "Lady, I don't know where you got that, but you're not on the list. Step back." The crowd behind her stirred, a ripple of whispers and sidelong glances, their curiosity laced with judgment. A woman in a fur stole murmured to her companion, "Who does she think she is?" Evelyn stood her ground, her 5'4" frame unyielding, her gaze locked on the guards. She could feel the weight of history in that moment, the echo of doors slammed shut, of voices silenced, of dreams buried under the weight of a world that refused to see her. But she wasn't here to beg. She was here to reclaim something stolen, something sacred. The guard took a step closer, his bulk towering over her, his voice dropping to a growl. "Don't make a scene, ma'am. You don't belong here." The words hit like a slap, but Evelyn's expression didn't waver. She had heard them before, in boardrooms, in galleries, in the quiet corners of her own mind. Yet tonight, they carried a different weight, because behind those glass doors hung her paintings, her soul poured onto canvas, displayed under someone else's name. Over 30% of the exhibition's masterpieces were hers, created in the sleepless nights of her youth, in the shadow of a city that had tried to erase her. She opened her mouth to speak, but a second guard appeared, his hand on his radio, his eyes cold. "Last chance," he said. "Leave or we call the cops." The crowd's whispers grew louder, a chorus of speculation and scorn. Evelyn's pulse raced, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for herself tonight. She was fighting for every woman who had been told her voice didn't matter, for every artist whose work of pattern had been stolen, for every soul who had been deemed unworthy by a world too blind to see their light. She took a step forward, her voice rising, clear and unwavering. "I belong here more than you know," she said, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. The first guard scoffed, but something in her tone made him hesitate, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The crowd leaned in, sensing a story unfolding, their murmurs shifting from judgment to intrigue. Evelyn's mind raced, memories flooding back, of the night she'd spent painting in a cramped apartment, of the art dealer who'd promised her fame but delivered betrayal, of the decades she'd watched her work celebrated while she stood in the shadows. She could walk away now, retreat into the safety of silence, but that wasn't who she was. Not anymore. The second guard grabbed her arm, his grip tight, and Evelyn's breath caught, not from pain but from the audacity of it. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low but laced with steel. The crowd gasped, a few stepping closer, phones raised to capture the drama. The first guard waved them back, his authority fraying. "She's nobody," he shouted, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. Evelyn pulled her arm free, her eyes blazing. "You're wrong," she said, her voice carrying a quiet power that silenced the crowd. "I'm the reason half this gallery exists." The words hung in the air. A challenge, a promise, a truth that no one yet understood. The guards exchanged a glance, their confidence shaken, but before they could respond, a woman in a sleek red dress pushed through the crowd, her heels clicking on the pavement. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing as she took in Evelyn's modest coat and defiant stance. She was Claire Vanguard, the gallery's director, a figure known for her ruthless control over Chicago's art scene. Evelyn met her gaze, unflinching, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Claire's lips tightened, her expression a mix of irritation and unease. "This woman claims she has an invitation," the first guard said, his tone less certain now. Claire glanced at the crumpled paper in Evelyn's hand, then back at her face, her eyes cold. "I don't know who you are," she said, "but you're not welcome here. Leave, or I'll have you escorted out." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she didn't move. She could feel the weight of her paintings inside, their vibrant colors calling to her, their stories begging to be told. She had spent decades in silence, but tonight that silence would end. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. Claire laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound, but the crowd was no longer with her. They were watching Evelyn, drawn to the mystery of a woman who refused to be erased. As the guards moved to push her back, Evelyn took a final stand, her voice rising above the chaos. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said, "and I painted the heart of this exhibition." The words echoed, a spark in the darkness, and as the crowd erupted in murmurs, Evelyn knew the battle had only begun. Evelyn Carter sat alone in her modest South Side apartment, the distant hum of Chicago's evening traffic seeping through the cracked window, her hands still trembling from the confrontation at the Sterling Gallery hours earlier. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp casting long shadows across walls adorned with sketches, half-finished dreams in charcoal and ink, remnants of a life spent chasing beauty in a world that often refused to see it. At 54, Evelyn's body ached from years of toil, but her spirit burned with a defiance forged in the fires of her youth. She leaned back in her worn armchair, her eyes drifting to a small, framed photograph on the shelf. A younger Evelyn, paint-splattered and smiling, standing in a cramped studio in the 1980s, her hands clutching a canvas that would later hang in galleries under someone else's name. The memory pulled her back, sharp and unrelenting, to a time when hope and heartbreak walked hand in hand. Chicago in 1983 was a city carved by invisible lines. Race, class, power, lines Evelyn crossed daily as a Black woman, daring to dream beyond the confines of her circumstances. She was 26 then, living in a one-room apartment in Englewood, where the rent was $200 a month and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments. Her days were spent working as a cleaner at a downtown hotel, scrubbing floors for $25 an hour. Her nights devoted to painting, her only solace in a world that seemed determined to break her. Her canvases were bold, vibrant, alive with the stories of her people, mothers who sang through sorrow, fathers who worked until their hands bled, children who danced in the face of despair. But the art world was a fortress, its gates guarded by men who saw her as little more than a curiosity. She'd hauled her portfolio to every gallery in the city, from the Loop to Lincoln Park, only to be met with polite smiles and empty promises. "Your work is interesting," they'd say, their eyes already drifting to the door. "But it's not what we're looking for." The rejection stung, but it was the condescension that cut deepest, the unspoken assumption that a Black woman from the South Side had no place in their rarefied world. Evelyn poured her pain into her art, each brushstroke a rebellion, each canvas a testament to her refusal to be erased. By 1985, she had created over 50 paintings, enough for a solo exhibition, but no gallery would touch her. She was on the verge of giving up, her dreams fraying under the weight of poverty and prejudice, when a man named Victor Hargrove walked into her life. He was a white art dealer in his 40s, impeccably dressed, with a smile that promised salvation and eyes that calculated every move. He'd seen one of her paintings at a community center show, a vivid depiction of a black family gathered around a kitchen table, their faces radiant with love and resilience, and he tracked her down. "You have talent," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood. Standing in her cramped apartment, his polished shoes out of place on the worn linoleum. "Real talent. But talent alone won't open doors. I can." Evelyn was wary, her instincts honed by years of navigating a world that rarely offered kindness without a catch. But Victor's words were a lifeline, and she was drowning. He offered her a deal. He would sell her paintings, secure exhibitions, and build her name. But there were conditions. Her work would be sold under a pseudonym, Elena Cross, a name he claimed was more marketable. She would receive a percentage of the sales, enough to live on, but the details were vague. The contract dense with fine print and she barely understood. "Trust me," he said, his smile unwavering. "This is how the game is played." Evelyn hesitated, her heart screaming to refuse. But the weight of her reality, bills piling up, her mother's medical debts, the constant threat of eviction, pressed against her. She signed, her hand shaking, not knowing she was signing away her identity. Victor was true to his word. In part, her paintings sold, first to small collectors, then to major galleries. By 1988, Elena Cross was a rising star. Her work praised in the Chicago Tribune as a bold new voice in American art. But Evelyn was a ghost, watching from the shadows as her creations were celebrated. Her name erased. She received checks, 500 here, or 1,000 there, but the sums were a fraction of what her paintings fetched. When she questioned Victor, his answers were slick, evasive. "This is just the beginning," he'd say. "Be patient." Patience became her prison. Over the years, she painted more, each canvas a piece of her soul. But the joy of creation was tainted by the knowledge that her work was no longer hers. She stopped going to galleries, unable to bear seeing her paintings hung under a stranger's name. By the 1990s, she had retreated into herself, painting less, working odd jobs to survive, her dreams buried under the weight of a betrayal she couldn't undo. But the fire in her never died. She kept every sketch, every draft, every scrap of evidence that tied her to her art, hiding them in a locked trunk under her bed. Tonight, that fire roared anew. The humiliation at the Sterling Gallery had cracked something open, a resolve she hadn't felt in decades. She rose from her chair, her movements deliberate, and opened the trunk. Inside were her sketches, her contracts, her truth, proof that she was the artist behind Elena Cross. Her hands traced the edges of a drawing, a self-portrait from 1986, her younger face fierce and unbowed. She wasn't that woman anymore, but she could be again. The Sterling Gallery had her paintings, over 30% of their exhibition, and they thought they could erase her. They were wrong. Evelyn's mind churned with plans, her heart pounding with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know how she'd fight, but she knew she would. The city that had tried to break her would hear her voice, and the world that had stolen her legacy would face her truth. Evelyn Carter stood in the faint glow of a street lamp outside a South Side diner, the bitter Chicago wind tugging at her scarf as she clutched a battered sketchbook, its pages filled with the ghosts of her stolen art. It was the morning after her clash at the Sterling Gallery, and the sting of rejection still lingered, but something fiercer burned beneath it, a resolve to unravel the lie that had buried her name for decades. At 54, she knew the weight of time, how it could erode dreams, but also how it could sharpen a woman's will. Her mind churned with memories of Victor Hargrove, the art dealer whose promises had chained her to a pseudonym, and the contract that had turned her paintings into someone else's legacy. She needed answers, proof, a way to claw back what was hers. But the path was murky, and the art world was a labyrinth of power and privilege. As she stepped into the diner, the bell above the door jingling, the smell of coffee and bacon grease enveloped her, grounding her in the familiar. She slid into a vinyl booth, her eyes scanning the room, working-class faces, black and brown, men and women who knew what it meant to fight for every scrap of dignity. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, poured her coffee without asking. Evelyn opened her sketchbook, tracing the lines of a drawing from 1987, a vibrant scene of a black church choir, its joy and sorrow woven into every stroke. That painting hung in the Sterling Gallery now, credited to Elena Cross, fetching tens of thousands while Evelyn scraped by on $12 an hour as a part-time librarian. The injustice gnawed at her, but it was the erasure that hurt most. Her story, her struggle, her soul, stripped away by a system that valued her art, but not her existence. Victor's contract was the key, a document she hadn't seen in years, its details blurred by time and betrayal. She remembered signing it in 1980, her hands trembling in that cramped Englewood apartment. Victor's voice smooth as silk. "This is your ticket to the big leagues," he'd said, his fountain pen gleaming. The contract stipulated that her paintings would be sold under Elena Cross to maximize market appeal, a phrase that even then felt like a slap. She'd received 10% of each sale, with Victor's gallery taking the rest for expenses and promotion. She was young, desperate, and naive, believing his promises of future recognition. Instead, he'd built an empire on her work, selling her paintings to collectors across the country, while she remained invisible. By 1990, Elena Cross was a name whispered in elite circles, her art hanging in museums from New York to Los Angeles. But Evelyn was a shadow, her checks barely covering rent. When she'd confronted Victor, demanding her name on her work, his smile had turned cold. "The market doesn't want a black woman from the South Side," he'd said. "Elena Cross is who they buy." The memory tightened her chest, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the present. She needed that contract, or proof of her authorship, something to expose the truth. Her sketches were a start, early drafts with her initials, EC, hidden in the corners, but they weren't enough. Victor was long gone, retired to a mansion in Florida, but the Sterling Gallery was his legacy, run by his protege, Claire Vanguard, the woman who'd dismissed her last night. Evelyn knew Claire held the keys to her past, but confronting her would be like storming a fortress. As she sipped her coffee, lost in thought, a young woman slid into the booth across from her, uninvited. She was in her 30s, white, with sharp green eyes and a notebook tucked under her arm. "Evelyn Carter?" she asked, her voice low but direct. Evelyn stiffened, her instincts flaring. "Who's asking?" The woman leaned forward, undeterred. "Rachel Moore, freelance journalist. I was at the Sterling Gallery last night. I saw what happened. You said you painted the heart of that exhibition. I want to know why." Evelyn's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She'd learned to distrust strangers, especially those who came asking questions. But Rachel's gaze held no pity, only curiosity and something like respect. "I don't know you, so," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "And I don't talk to reporters." Rachel didn't flinch. "I'm not here to exploit you. I've been digging into the Sterling Gallery for months. Shady deals, misattributed art, artists pushed out. Your story could blow it open." Evelyn studied her, weighing the risk. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but the fire in her gut told her she couldn't fight alone. "What do you know about the gallery?" she asked, testing the waters. Rachel leaned closer, her voice dropping. "They've been selling art under false names for years, skimming profits, erasing artists like you. I've got sources, but I need someone who's lived it. You're not just a bystander. Are you?" Evelyn's fingers tightened around her sketchbook, the weight of her secret pressing against her. She could walk away, keep her pain private, but the thought of her paintings hanging under a lie was unbearable. "I'm not promising anything," she said finally, "but I'll hear you out." Rachel nodded, pulling out her notebook. "Start with Victor Hargrove. He ran the gallery in the 80s. Your name came up in old records. A contract. Vague mentions of an artist he discovered. What did he do to you? Evelyn's breath caught, the past rushing back. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice low but firm. He took my art, my name, my life. I painted for him, but he sold me out. Rachel's pen moved quickly, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's. Keep going, she said. Evelyn shared fragments, Victor's promises, the pseudonym, the checks that kept her silent. She stopped short of the full truth, her instincts still cautious, but it was enough to hook Rachel. This is bigger than you know, Rachel said, her voice urgent. The Sterling Gallery's built on lies like yours. If we can find that contract or proof of your work, we can take them down. Evelyn's heart pounded, hope and fear colliding. She'd spent decades in silence. But Rachel's words were a spark, a chance to reclaim her voice. It won't be easy, she said. They'll fight dirty. Rachel smiled, a glint of defiance in her eyes. So will we. As they spoke, Evelyn felt the diner fade, the weight of her past lifting just enough to let her breathe. She didn't trust Rachel fully. Not yet. But for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The Sterling Gallery thought they could bury her, but they didn't know the strength of a woman who'd survived their game. Her paintings were out there, calling her name, and she would answer. Rachel Moore hunched over a cluttered desk in her small Logan Square apartment, the glow of her laptop casting sharp shadows across stacks of notes, old gallery catalogs, and a half-empty coffee mug. It was 3 days since her meeting with Evelyn Carter at the Southside Diner, and the weight of Evelyn's story pressed against her, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. At 34, Rachel had built a reputation as a dogged freelance journalist, chasing stories the big papers ignored. Corruption, exploitation, the quiet injustices that festered in Chicago's underbelly. But this story, Evelyn's story, felt different, like a fuse waiting to ignite. The Sterling Gallery's gleaming facade hid a rot she could almost taste, and Evelyn's claim that she'd painted over 30% of their exhibition under a stolen name was the key to cracking it open. Rachel's fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing auction records from the 1980s, searching for traces of Elena Cross, the pseudonym that had erased Evelyn's identity. She'd already found mentions in old art journals, glowing reviews of Cross's work, but no photos, no interviews, no trace of the artist's real face. It was as if Elena Cross existed only on canvas, a ghost conjured by Victor Hargrove's cunning. Rachel's sources, former gallery assistants, disgruntled collectors, had hinted at a pattern. Artists, often women or minorities, whose work was sold under false names, their profits siphoned by the gallery's elite. Evelyn's contract, if it still existed, could prove it. But the Sterling Gallery was a fortress, its records locked behind money and influence. Rachel glanced at her phone, hesitating before texting Evelyn. Found some leads. Can we meet? Need more details. She hit send, her gut twisting. Evelyn was wary, her trust hard-earned, and Rachel knew pushing too hard could shut her down. But time was slipping. Claire Vanguard, the gallery's director, wasn't stupid. If she'd sensed trouble at the exhibition, she'd be covering her tracks. Across town, Evelyn sat in her apartment, the text lighting up her phone as she sorted through a box of old sketches, each one a lifeline to her past. At 54, she'd learned to guard her heart, to expect betrayal from a world that had taken so much. Rachel's message stirred a mix of hope and dread. The journalist's intensity reminded Evelyn of her younger self, but trust was a risk she'd paid for before. She thought of Victor Hargrove, his promises that had turned her art into a lie, and Claire, his protege, who'd dismissed her with a flick of her wrist. The Sterling Gallery was their kingdom, built on her stolen legacy, and Evelyn's silence had let it thrive. She typed a reply, tomorrow, noon, same diner, and set the phone down, her resolve hardening. She pulled out a sketch from 1986, a portrait of her mother, her hands worn from years of factory work, her eyes radiant with unyielding strength. That painting hung in the gallery now, priced at $45,000, credited to Elena Cross. The theft wasn't just money, it was her history, her soul. The next day, Evelyn arrived at the diner early, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, her green coat buttoned against the chill. Rachel was already there, her notebook open, a fire in her eyes. "I found something," Rachel said, sliding a photocopied auction record across the table. 1989 Sotheby's, one of Elena Cross's paintings, sold for $20,000. The seller was Sterling Gallery, but the artist's cut was listed as undisclosed. That's not normal. Evelyn's chest tightened, the numbers a reminder of her erasure. "I got $800 for that sale," she said, her voice low. "Victor said it was my share." Rachel's jaw clenched, her pen scratching furiously. "They're stealing from you, and I bet you're not the only one. I need specifics, dates, paintings, anything to tie you to Elena Cross." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tracing the sketchbook's edge. Opening up meant exposing wounds she'd buried for decades, but staying silent meant letting the gallery win. "I kept records," she said finally. "Sketches, receipts, letters from Victor. They're at my place, but they're not enough on their own." Rachel leaned forward, her voice urgent. "They're a start. If we can match your sketches to the paintings, or find that contract, we've got a case." Evelyn nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. "Claire knows who I am now. They'll be watching." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Good, let them sweat. I've got a contact at the Art Institute. Someone who can verify your work style. We're close." "Evelyn?" The word "we" hung in the air, unfamiliar but heavy with possibility. Evelyn wanted to believe it, but she'd walked alone too long. As they spoke, Rachel's phone buzzed, a message from a source, cryptic but alarming. "Sterling's shredding old files. Move fast." Rachel's face hardened. "They're covering up," she said. "We need to get to those records before they're gone." Evelyn's pulse quickened, the stakes rising. She thought of her paintings, their colors calling her, their stories trapped under a lie. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear. Rachel outlined a strategy, digging through public archives, pressuring former gallery staff, and if needed, confronting Claire directly. "It's risky," Rachel admitted. "They've got lawyers, money, power, but we've got the truth." Evelyn met her gaze, a spark of her old fire flaring. "Truth's all I've got left." They parted with a plan to meet again. Evelyn's sketches in Rachel's hands, a fragile bridge between them. Back at her apartment, Rachel pored over the drawings, their bold lines and vivid emotion unmistakable. Even to her untrained eye, she cross-referenced them with photos from the Sterling exhibition, her heart racing as patterns emerged. Same brushwork, same soul, but the gallery wasn't idle. That evening, Claire Vanguard sat in her sleek office, a glass of bourbon in hand, her eyes scanning a report from her assistant. "Evelyn Carter," the report read, "former associate of Victor Hargrove. Potential threat." Claire's lips tightened. She'd built the Sterling Gallery into a powerhouse, and no one, especially not a forgotten artist from the South Side, would tear it down. She picked up her phone, dialing a number. "Find out what she knows," she said, her voice cold, "and make sure she stays quiet." Across the city, Evelyn lay awake, her mind racing. She didn't know Claire's next move, but she felt the noose tightening. Her paintings were out there, her truth waiting to be claimed, and for the first time in years, she wasn't running. The Sterling Gallery had underestimated her, and that was their mistake. Evelyn Carter's heart pounded as she stepped off the CTA bus, the Chicago wind biting through her green wool coat, her eyes scanning the darkening South Side street for shadows that didn't belong. It was a week since her second meeting with Rachel Moore, and the air felt heavier now, charged with an unseen threat that followed her like a predator. At 54, Evelyn had learned to sense danger, a skill honed by years of navigating a city that could be as cruel as it was beautiful. Her apartment key trembled in her hand as she approached her building, the memory of a slashed tire on her old Chevy 2 days ago still fresh. The note tucked under her wiper, "Stay away," wasn't signed, but she knew who sent it. The Sterling Gallery's reach was long, and Claire Vanguard's warning at the exhibition wasn't empty. Evelyn's resolve hadn't wavered, but fear was a constant companion, whispering doubts as she climbed the creaking stairs to her third-floor apartment. Inside, she locked the door, her breath steadying as she set her sketchbook on the table, its pages worn from years of hiding her truth. Rachel's investigation was gaining ground, and with it, the stakes were climbing. The journalist had called yesterday, her voice electric with discovery. "I found something. Evelyn, a signature? Your signature, hidden in one of the paintings. We're close." Those words had lit a fire in Evelyn, but they also tightened the noose. The gallery's allies were circling, and she could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to falter. Across town, Rachel sat in a dimly lit coffee shop near the Art Institute, her laptop open. A grainy photo of a Sterling Gallery painting zoomed in on her screen. The canvas, a vibrant depiction of a Black family's Sunday dinner, was credited to Elena Cross and priced at $50,000. But in the bottom corner, barely visible under layers of paint, were the initials EC, Evelyn Carter. Rachel's contact at the Art Institute, a curator named Dr. Lena Harris, had confirmed it matched the style of Evelyn's sketches. "It's deliberate," Lena had said, her voice low. She hit her mark, knowing someone might look. Rachel's pulse raced as she typed up notes, her mind mapping the next steps. The signature was a crack in the gallery's armor, but it wasn't enough alone. She needed the contract, or testimony from someone inside Victor Hargrove's old circle, to prove Evelyn's authorship. Her story was taking shape, pitched to a major outlet, and art critics were starting to whisper about Sterling's shady practices. Activists on social media, alerted by Rachel's discreet posts, were amplifying the buzz, tagging the gallery with hashtags like art theft and justice for artists. The pressure was building, but so was the danger. Rachel's inbox held threats now, anonymous emails warning her to back off or face consequences. She ignored them, but she couldn't ignore the risk to Evelyn. The older woman was the heart of this fight, and Rachel knew the gallery would hit her hardest. Back at her apartment, Evelyn poured a glass of water, her hands steady despite the weight of the day. She'd spent the morning at the library, her part-time job a quiet refuge. But even there, she'd noticed a man lingering too long near the checkout, his eyes tracking her. When she'd confronted him, he'd vanished. But the message was clear. She was being watched. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., Art Institute, bringing Lena. We've got a plan." Evelyn's chest tightened, a mix of hope and dread. She trusted Rachel more now, but the journalist's zeal scared her. This wasn't just a story, it was her life, her pain, her legacy. She sat down, opening her sketchbook to a drawing from 1988, a self-portrait with fierce eyes and a clenched fist, a reminder of the woman she'd been before Victor's betrayal. That woman was still inside her, ready to fight. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the Art Institute, the grand stone lion standing guard as she entered the hushed galleries. Rachel was waiting with Lena, a Black woman in her 60s with silver hair and a quiet authority. "Your work is unmistakable, Dermin," Lena said, her voice warm but firm, holding up a photo of the signed painting. "The brushwork, the emotion, it's yours. I'd stake my reputation on it." Evelyn's throat tightened, the validation a balm to wounds she'd carried for decades. "Will it hold up?" she asked. Lena nodded. "With more evidence. Yes, the signature's a start, but we need records, contracts, letters, anything tying you to Victor Hargrove." Rachel chimed in, her voice urgent. "I'm chasing a lead, a former assistant of Victor's, retired in Evanston. He might talk, but we have to move fast. Sterling's nervous." Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. She handed Lena a sketch. its lines matching the painting's composition. "This is the draft," she said. "I have more at home." Lena's eyes lit up. "This could be enough for a public challenge. If we present it to the right people, the gallery won't be able to ignore you." The meeting ended with a plan. Rachel would track down the assistant, Lena would rally art world allies, and Evelyn would dig through her records for more proof. But as Evelyn left the museum, a man in a dark coat followed her, his footsteps deliberate. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding, slipping into a crowded cafe to lose him. Back home, she found her apartment door ajar, her lock scratched. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. Back off. Evelyn's fears surged, but so did her anger. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every artist silenced, every woman dismissed, every soul erased by a world that profited from their pain. Across the city, Claire Vanguard sat in her office, her fingers drumming in on a polished desk. A report from her fixer confirmed Evelyn's meeting at the Art Institute. "She's working with a journalist," the report read. "They're digging." Claire's eyes narrowed. She'd underestimated Evelyn, but not anymore. She dialed a number, her voice ice. "Double the pressure. Make her stop." As night fell, Evelyn sat by her window, her sketchbook open, her mother's portrait staring back. The gallery thought they could scare her into silence, but they didn't know her strength. Her paintings were out there, her signature a whisper of truth, and she would make the world hear it. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the Sterling Gallery's grand foyer, the crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over the crowd of Chicago's elite. Their laughter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her chest. 2 weeks had passed since the Art Institute meeting, and the threats had only grown. Anonymous calls at midnight, a brick through her apartment window with a note reading, "Last warning." Weighing on at 54, Evelyn knew fear, but tonight it was defiance that carried her forward. Her green coat swapped for a tailored navy dress, her head held high despite the eyes that turned to judge her. Rachel Moore stood beside her, her sharp gaze scanning the room, a recorder hidden in her purse. The gallery's second event, a celebration of modern masters, featured more of Evelyn's paintings, still credited to Elena Cross. And the irony wasn't lost on her. She was here to reclaim her truth, and the weight of her sketches, tucked in a folder under her arm, felt like armor. The air was thick with perfume and privilege, but Evelyn felt the undercurrent of unease as Claire Vanguard's assistants whispered, their glances darting toward her. Rachel had orchestrated their entry, leveraging a contact who'd slipped their names onto the guest list. But Evelyn knew they were walking into a lion's den, the signature Rachel found, confirmed by Dr. Lena Harris, had sparked a firestorm online at Barome, with activists and art bloggers questioning Sterling's ethics. Rachel's expose was nearly ready, but tonight was about more than evidence. It was about forcing the gallery to face her. As they moved through the crowd, Evelyn's eyes locked on her paintings, hung like trophies on the pristine walls. One, a 1987 canvas of a black woman braiding her daughter's hair, glowed with a warmth that pierced her heart. It was priced at $60,000, a fortune she'd never seen. She stopped, her breath catching, and a man in a tuxedo bumped into her, muttering, "Watch it." Rachel's hand steadied her, her voice low. "Stay focused. We're here for Claire." Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. They found Claire near the center of the room, her red dress a beacon of power, her smile practiced as she charmed a group of collectors. Evelyn's pulse raced, memories of Claire's dismissal at the first event fueling her. Rachel gave her a nod, and Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Ms. Vanguard, we need to talk." The room seemed to pause, heads turning, the hum of conversation faltering. Claire's smile didn't waver, but her eyes turned to ice. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Evelyn held her ground, her 5'4" frame unyielding. "Evelyn Carter, I painted a third of this exhibition, and you know it." A gasp rippled through the crowd, phone slipping out to record. Claire's laugh was sharp, cutting. That's absurd. Security. Please. Two guards moved toward them, but Rachel stepped forward, her voice loud and clear. She's telling the truth. We have proof, sketches, a hidden signature. Your gallery's been stealing from artists for decades. The crowd stirred, murmurs growing into a chorus of curiosity. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned closer, whispering, "Is that true?" Evelyn seized the moment, holding up her folder. "These are my drafts from the 1980s. They match the paintings you're selling as Elena Cross's. I was erased, but I'm here now." Claire's facade cracked, her eyes darting to the guards. "This is a private event. Remove them." But the crowd wasn't with her. A young black woman in a sequined dress stepped forward, her voice bold. "Let her speak. I want to hear this." Others nodded, their phones still recording, and Evelyn felt a shift, a tide turning. She opened the folder, showing a sketch of the braiding scene, its lines identical to the painting on the wall. "This is mine," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "Victor Hargrove took my name, and you've profited from it." Claire's face tightened, but she recovered, her voice smooth. "You're mistaken. Elena Cross is a documented artist. This is slander." "Oh," Rachel countered, pulling out a photo of the signature. "Then explain this. E.C. hidden in the paint? It's Evelyn's mark." The crowd pressed closer, their whispers now demands for answers. A man in a suit, a collector, called out, "Is this true, Claire?" Before she could respond, the young woman in sequins spoke again. "I'm an artist too. If she's lying, prove it. If not, you owe her." Applause broke out, small but growing, and Evelyn's chest swelled. She wasn't alone anymore. The guards hesitated, unsure as Claire's control slipped. "This is nonsense," she snapped, but her voice wavered. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes locked on Claire's. "You can't hide the truth forever. My paintings speak for me." Claire's composure cracked, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." She signaled the guards, who moved to escort them out, but the crowd's support slowed their advance. Rachel whispered to Evelyn, "We've got what we need. Let's go." As they were ushered toward the exit, the young woman in sequins followed, slipping Evelyn her card. "I'm Tasha, with the Chicago Artists Collective. We're with you." Outside, under the cold streetlights, Evelyn's breath came in sharp bursts, adrenaline coursing through her. Rachel grinned, checking her recorder. "That's going viral. Claire's rattled." Evelyn nodded, her fear tempered by a new strength. The crowd's support, Tasha's card, the weight of her sketches, it was a lifeline. But Claire's threat echoed, and Evelyn knew the gallery would strike back. Across town. Claire paced her office, her phone pressed to her ear. "She's a problem," she hissed to her fixer. "Find a way to silence her, legally or otherwise." The line went quiet. Then a voice replied, "Consider it done." Evelyn, back in her apartment, stared at her mother's portrait, its eyes urging her on. The gallery thought they could break her, but they didn't know the power of a black woman who'd survived their world. Her paintings were her voice, and tonight they'd spoken. The storm was here, and she was ready. Evelyn Carter sat at her kitchen table, the dim light of a single bulb casting shadows across a stack of yellowed papers. Sketches, receipts, letters from Victor Hargrove, each a fragment of the life she'd lost to the Sterling Gallery's greed. The Chicago night pressed against her apartment window, heavy with the threat of rain, mirroring the storm brewing inside her. At 54, Evelyn had faced countless battles, but the past week had tested her like never before. Rachel Moore's expose was days from publication, a bombshell set to reveal Evelyn's authorship of over 30% of the gallery's prize collection. And the fallout from their confrontation at the second event had turned her life into a battlefield. Her phone buzzed with a new threat. "You'll lose everything." The fifth that day, each one a needle in her resolve. Yet, as she traced the lines of a 1986 sketch, a portrait of her father's calloused hands, she felt a fire no threat could extinguish. The gallery's legal team had struck first, sending a cease and desist letter accusing her of defamation, demanding she retract her claims or face a lawsuit that would bankrupt her. The letter, delivered by a courier who lingered too long outside her door, was Claire Vanguard's handiwork, a calculated move to silence her before Rachel's story hit. Across town, Rachel paced her apartment, her laptop open to the final draft of the exposé, now accepted by a major Chicago outlet with a Sunday front page slot. The evidence was damning. Evelina's sketches, the hidden EI signature, testimony from Victor's former assistant, who'd confirmed the pseudonym scam, and Dr. Lena Harris's analysis tying Evelyn's style to Elena Cross. Social media was ablaze, with hashtag Justice for Evelyn trending, fueled by Tasha and the Chicago Artists Collective. But the gallery wasn't idle. Rachel's editor had received a call from Sterling's lawyers, hinting at consequences if the story ran, and her car had been vandalized, its windows smashed in a clear warning. She texted Evelyn, her fingers steady despite the fear. "They're scared. We're almost there. Stay strong." Evelyn read the message, her heart a mix of gratitude and dread. Rachel was a warrior, but this fight was personal for Evelyn, a reckoning with decades of silence. She thought back to 1980, signing Victor's contract in that cramped Englewood apartment, her dreams traded for survival. She'd blamed herself for years, believing her desperation had invited the betrayal, but now she saw the truth. Victor, Claire, the gallery, they'd preyed on her because she was a black woman they thought they could erase. That realization was her armor, forged in the pain of her past, and it gave her the strength to keep fighting. The next morning, Evelyn met Rachel and Tasha at a Southside Community Center, a safe haven where the Artists Collective gathered. The room buzzed with allies, artists, activists, a few reporters drawn by the growing scandal. Tasha, her eyes fierce, handed Evelyn a flyer for a planned protest outside the Sterling Gallery the day the exposé dropped. "We're with you," Tasha said. "This isn't just your fight anymore." Rachel outlined the plan. The story would run, backed by a press conference where Evelyn would speak, presenting her sketches and the signature evidence. Lena would join, lending her credibility, and the collective would amplify the call for justice. But Rachel's voice was grim as she added, "Sterling's playing dirty. They've got a PR firm spinning lies, claiming you're a fraud, and their lawyers are digging into your past, looking for dirt." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Memories of old mistakes, debts, a brief arrest in the 90s for protesting, flashing through her mind. "They won't find much," she said, her voice steady. "I've got nothing to hide." Rachel nodded, but her eyes held worry. "They don't need truth. They need doubt." The meeting ended with a promise to stand together. But as Evelyn left, a man in a gray sedan watched from across the street, his camera clicking. She spotted him, her pulse spiking, and quickened her pace, slipping into a crowded market to lose him. Back home, she found a new letter slipped under her door, this one from a law firm offering a settlement, $50,000, to drop her claims and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The sum was a fortune to her, but it was blood money, a bribe to bury her truth. She tore it up, her hands shaking with rage. That night, Evelyn sat with her mother's portrait, its eyes a mirror of her own strength. She thought of the choices she'd made, signing Victor's contract, staying silent as her art was stolen, and forgave herself. She wasn't that scared young woman anymore. She was Evelyn Carter, artist, survivor, a black woman who'd endured a world that tried to break her. Her identity was her power, and no lawsuit or threat could take it away. The next day, Rachel called with news. The gallery had filed an injunction to block the exposé, claiming it violated trade secrets. The outlet's lawyers were fighting it, but the delay gave Sterling time to spin their narrative. Evelyn's resolve hardened. She agreed to a preemptive move, a public statement at the community center, live streamed by Tasha's group, to keep the pressure on. The event was set for tomorrow, and Evelyn spent the night preparing, her words a blend of pain and defiance, ready to tell the world who she was. Across the city, Claire Vanguard sat in her office, her face a mask of fury as she read the latest social media posts. The protest flyer was circulating, and Evelyn's name was everywhere. She called her fixer, her voice sharp. "End this now. Whatever it takes." The man on the line paused, then replied, "It's done." As dawn broke, Evelyn stood at her window, the city waking below. Her paintings were out there, her truth on the verge of breaking free, but the gallery's shadow loomed. She didn't know what Claire's next move was, but she knew it would be brutal. Yet, for the first time in decades, Evelyn felt whole, her past no longer a chain, but a foundation. The showdown was coming, and she was ready to face it, not as Elena Cross, but as herself. Evelyn Carter stood on a makeshift stage in the Southside Community Center, her hands steady as she gripped a microphone, the weight of 1,000 eyes, artists, activists, reporters, and everyday Chicagoans fixed on her. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating her navy dress and the stack of sketches beside her room, each one a testament to her stolen legacy. At 54, Evelyn had faced a lifetime of erasure, but today was January 12, 2026, was her reckoning. Rachel Moore's expose had hit the Chicago Tribune's front page at midnight. Its headline, "Hidden Brush, the Black Artist Behind Sterling's Stolen Art, Igniting a Firestorm." The article laid bare Evelyn's authorship of over 30% of the Sterling Gallery's collection, backed by her sketches, the hidden EC signature, Dr. Lena Harris's analysis, and testimony from Victor Hargrove's former assistant. Social media exploded with hashtag Justice for Evelyn, and a crowd of protesters gathered outside the gallery, led by Tasha and the Chicago Artists Collective. But the battle wasn't over. Claire Vanguard had doubled down, her PR firm spinning lies that Evelyn was a disgruntled opportunist, while her lawyers filed a defamation suit to bury the truth. Evelyn knew the risks: bankruptcy, harassment, the weight of a system rigged against her. But as she faced the packed room, her fear gave way to a power she'd reclaimed. Rachel stood beside her, her eyes fierce, while Lena and Tasha flanked them, a united front. The live stream, broadcast by the collective, reached thousands, and Evelyn felt the world listening. She took a breath, her voice clear and unwavering. "My name is Evelyn Carter, and I painted the heart of the Sterling Gallery's collection. For 40 years, they stole my art, my name, my story. Because I'm a Black woman, they thought they could erase. Today, I'm taking it back." The room erupted in applause, fists raised, phones capturing every word. Evelyn held up a 1987 sketch, its vibrant eyes matching a painting still hanging in the gallery, priced at $65,000. "This is my work," she said, her voice rising. "Victor Hargrove forced me to sign it as Elena Cross, a name he said the world would buy. Claire Vanguard profited from that lie, but no more." She laid out the evidence, receipts, letters, the contract she'd found buried in her trunk, its fine print exposing Victor's theft. Lena stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming, her voice authoritative. "Evelyn's style is unmistakable. The art world owes her not just credit, but justice." Rachel followed, detailing the gallery's pattern of exploiting artists, her expose now corroborated by two more who'd come forward, their stories echoing Evelyn's. The crowd's energy surged, chants of "truth now," echoing, but Evelyn's words cut deepest, her pain and defiance a mirror for every silenced voice. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about every woman told her dreams don't matter, every artist of color dismissed, every soul buried by a world that profits from our pain. I'm here to say we're not invisible, we're not silent, and we're not done." Tears streaked her face, But her voice never wavered, and the room rose in a standing ovation, the sound shaking the walls. Across town, Claire Vanguard watched the live stream in her office, her face pale, her bourbon untouched. The protest outside her gallery had swelled to hundreds, their signs reading "End Art Theft" and "Honor Evelyn." Collectors were pulling their investments, and the Art Institute had canceled a planned Sterling exhibition. Claire's phone buzzed with panicked calls from her board, but she ignored them, her eyes fixed on Evelyn's face. She'd underestimated her, and now the empire she'd built on lies was crumbling. Her fixer had failed. Threats, vandalism, even a last-ditch attempt to bribe Evelyn with $100,000 had backfired when Evelyn leaked the offer online, fueling the outrage. Claire's lawyers were scrambling, but the evidence was ironclad, and public opinion had turned. She slammed her fist on the desk, but the fight was slipping away. Back at the community center, a reporter asked Evelyn, "What do you want from Sterling?" Her answer was swift, unflinching. "My name on my paintings, every cent they owe me, and an apology not just to me, but to every artist they've exploited." The crowd roared, and Tasha stepped up, announcing a class action lawsuit backed by the collective, targeting Sterling's profits. As the press conference ended, Evelyn stepped off the stage, her body trembling, but her spirit soaring. Strangers embraced her, artists thanked her, and a young black girl, no older than 10, handed her a drawing of a woman with a paintbrush, captioned, "Hero." Evelyn's eyes welled, the weight of her triumph sinking in. Later that day, the Sterling Gallery issued a statement, admitting errors in attribution and offering to reassess Evelyn's claims, a weak attempt at damage control. But the art world was shifting. Museums pledged to review their Elena Cross holdings, and collectors demanded transparency. Evelyn's paintings, now rightfully hers, were revalued, her net worth suddenly in the millions. She didn't care about the money, it was the recognition, the restoration of her name. That mattered. That evening, Evelyn stood in her apartment, her mother's portrait on the wall, its eyes proud. She'd faced racism, sexism, a system that tried to bury her. But she'd won, not just for herself, but for every artist who'd been silenced, every woman who'd been dismissed. Rachel called, her voice triumphant. "You did it, Evelyn. The world knows your name." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. They always should have. As she hung up, she opened her sketchbook, her fingers tracing a new drawing, a woman rising, her brush a weapon, her face her own. The fight wasn't over, but Evelyn Carter was no longer a shadow. She was a light, and her legacy would inspire others to claim their truth. Evelyn Carter, erased for decades, reclaims her art from a corrupt gallery, exposing racism and sexism. Thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our latest videos.